Raise the flag.
Light the cauldron. We declare the game's Odyssey open.
Welcome to the Games Odyssey podcast, your home for stories of glory from Olympia to now. I'm Jonathan Jordan.
And I'm Sarah Patton. We both love the Olympics and Paralympics, and we love history. And most of all, we love Olympic and Paralympic history.
That's right. But today, we are going to take a little bit of a break from the history side of things, especially before we get into the hot mess that is the 1904 St. Louis Games. Instead, today, we're going to talk about something a little more fun. We're going to talk about movies. But I promise this isn't turning into a movie podcast. It's just for this episode. So today we're going to blend together two of my favorite things, which is the games and movies. And Sarah, I know we've talked about this a little bit in the past. Obviously, I am a movie nerd. You not as much, but you do still like movies, right?
Yeah, I love movies. I probably have not seen as many movies as you have. In fact, I know I haven't seen as many movies as you have. And I'm also the person that in a conversation with friends that people will start quoting a movie or talking about a movie. And I'm the one that shocks people when some huge blockbuster I've never seen. I don't know. It wasn't until I was married that my husband forced me to watch Star Wars for the first time. So a lot of the big classics, I just haven't seen, but then a lot of the really cheesy movies I have seen and I love them.
See, with me, there's actually also a lot of big blockbuster movies that I've never seen, but then I've watched a lot of obscure movies that people have never heard of. So that's where my movie nerddom comes in, is sometimes I don't like to get on the bandwagon of what's popular with everyone else. But yeah, so here's what I think will be fun about this episode is, there's really not that many movies that have been made about the Olympic Games, even though it's been with us for a long time. So the Olympics, the Paralympics, every now and then we get a movie about them, sometimes a documentary, things like that. And so, it is a pretty small list, but I think it's fun to just think about, hey, I have an afternoon to kill. I want to watch something. I love the Olympics and Paralympics. What should I go watch? So we're just going to have a pretty unscripted conversation today and talk through some of our favorite games movies. By the way, before we get into talking about the movies, I want anyone listening right now to know that this may not be the best episode to listen to your kids, because oh my gosh, to listen to with your kids. You can tell that we are not doing this off of any kind of script today, obviously. But a lot of the movies that we're going to talk about do have some really heavy themes, and while we're not going to get into super detail about those, it's still the sort of thing where this is R-rated subject matter for a lot of these movies on the list. So again, may just be a good one to skip over if you've got little ones and you can listen to it on your own while you're washing dishes or walking the dog later on today. So just putting that out there now so that you're not surprised when we get into some of the topics. All right. So Sarah, you sent me your list ahead of time. And I had my list. So here's how we're going to do this is first, we're going to talk about the movies that we had different on our list. Okay. And we're going to go back and forth on that. So, tell me why you like the movie. Cause some of the ones you had on your list, I've never seen before. And then we'll end our discussion talking about the 5 or 6 movies that we both agreed upon. How's that sound?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
So actually, I'm going to start us off because I just watched this movie this week. It's been on my list for a few years since it came out, but that is the movie Richard Jewell. And I believe you said that it's on your list to watch too, but you haven't been able to get around to it. yet, right?
Right. Yeah. And of course, we were kids during the 1996 Olympics. I vaguely remember the bombing. I remember it being a big deal at the Atlanta Games. So I'm very curious to see the movie. The story of Richard Jewell, if you're familiar with it, is absolutely fascinating. So I'm very curious to know about how you think they did. Did they tell his story well in the movie? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, okay. As a movie as a whole, I really, really enjoyed it. And even though I remember the bombing happening at the Atlanta Games, I did not know this story at all. I did not know about this side of it, about the security guard, about Richard and his story. So this, in a lot of ways, was really new information for me. And I was almost reading up on the real life story while watching the movie and just kind of seeing how close it was to what really happened and how much they were able to fit in. But if you haven't seen it, it was directed by Clint Eastwood, who's about 1,000 years old and still making movies. It's amazing that he is still doing what he's doing and that he's doing it at such a high level, because the acting in this movie was absolutely incredible. The storytelling was really, really strong, but yeah, it took me by surprise a little bit, because I think it was better than honestly what I was expecting. And again, even though it's not about athletes, it's about a very important event that did happen at the Atlanta Games. So definitely, I would say bump it up your list if you can, if you haven't had a chance to see it yet. But yeah, I definitely give it a thumbs up. And once I watched it, I immediately had to revise my list and throw it on there. So that's how I felt about it.
All right. Well, yeah, that'll definitely be a high priority for me the next time I sit down to watch a movie.
But yeah, it's one of those things too where I don't want to say too much about it on here, A, just because of time, but B, because I think sometimes it's just better going into a movie not exactly knowing everything about the story and being a little bit surprised. Because from what I read while watching the movie, seems like they got a lot of it correct and they fit in a lot of the real life story. So I appreciated that about it. But Sarah, let's kick it over to you, because the first one you have on your list is actually a movie that I've not seen. So tell me a little bit about Unbroken.
Yeah, so Unbroken is certainly a heavy movie, and there's a lot that goes down in the movie Unbroken. It's about Louis Zamperini, who was an Olympian at the 1936 Olympics representing Team USA. The story goes throughout his life. It shows how he became a runner. He was kind of a little punk, and running was a way to kind of keep him out of trouble. And he goes and he doesn't get a medal. And you know, I don't want to give too many spoilers, kind of like what you said, but he doesn't get a medal, but he runs the final lap of his race at the Olympics really, really fast, that even Adolf Hitler himself was impressed. But there, as you know, we'll obviously get into it eventually, but as people who are familiar with the Olympics know, the 1936 Olympics were very, I want to say heavy, interesting, bizarre, because people knew that something was not right in Germany. And so it's interesting how they show what was kind of unfolding around the Olympic, like around the Olympic site and everything, and all the tension with Hitler. And then, as was the case with so many people, Louis gets drafted, ends up in the military, gets shot down, becomes a prisoner of war in Japan. And a huge part of the movie is just about his survival, both being lost at sea and as a POW in Japan. So it's hard. It's a hard watch. There's a lot of gruesome moments in there, but you know, Angelina Jolie directed it, and I know that she caught a lot of flack because people thought someone else could have done better with his story. At the same time, if I remember correctly, the movie rights to his life story were bought somewhere like in the 50s. And she's the one that actually got his story to the big screen. So as someone who's not a movie critic or a film critic or a film buff, I'm just happy that she told his story. And at the end, they wrap it up with explaining that a huge part of his story that I find inspiration in is that later on he suffers PTSD, but he survives the war and he returns to Japan and offers forgiveness because he's become a Christian at this point. And after he became a Christian is how he worked through his PTSD, and he goes and he forgives and offers grace and love to people that treated him terribly as a prisoner of war. The other thing that's interesting is that because he was an Olympic athlete, he was often set apart from other POWs, and they would make him run really fast and extra laps just kind of for entertainment. So the Olympics are a huge part of his story, but he had such an incredible life that the Olympics are just a small part of it. But it's what catapulted him to fame and notoriety. And the rest of his life, he used that platform really, really, really well. So I recommend it. I think Louis' story is, like I said, it's one that I draw inspiration from. Just the things that he did with his life were pretty huge. And it's a story of grit and survival. So yeah. I love Unbroken. It's not one that I would want to sit and watch over and over again because it is heavy, but I definitely saw it when it first came out. I also read the book. There's a couple of great books. Louis has an autobiography that tells his story, but the movie was made a couple of years after, I think her name is Laura Hildebrand. She's the author that told his story in a biography. So I recommend the books, both in his words and in her words.
Yeah. I actually have that book, but I have not read it. But yeah, she's the same author who also wrote Seabiscuit.
Yes.
And then she followed it up with Unbroken. But yeah, it's been on my shelf for a few years now. I have not read it yet. One of these days I'll probably have to listen to the audiobook. And it is a little surprising I haven't seen this movie because it definitely sounds like one right up my alley. And two of the writers on it are two of my favorite writers of all time. So it is a little surprising that I've not watched this one yet, but I'll definitely have to, if no other reason but to, just finally check it off my list, I suppose. All right. So if Unbroken isn't heavy enough for you, then the next one on my list is Foxcatcher. Sarah, how much do you know about Foxcatcher?
I have read a little bit on Wikipedia. I'm a little bit familiar with the plot. So just a little bit from reading about it, but I've not seen it. I don't even know if I've seen a trailer for the actual movie, but tell us about it.
Okay, so here's the funny thing about Foxcatcher, and this is also just sometimes how I am as a moviegoer, is a lot of times I don't look up a lot of information. So when I saw Foxcatcher in theaters, I actually had gone to the theater to go see a completely different movie, and I missed the start time. I can't remember what exactly happened, if I had run into traffic, but something happened where I got to the theater late. I hate going into movies late, and it wasn't one of those things where I was going to be walking into the trailers, right? Like it was a good 20 minutes into the movie that I was planning on seeing. So this ended up being my backup movie, and I actually had no idea when I bought my ticket to it that it actually would have an Olympics storyline in it. I just saw the poster and I said, oh, hey, Steve Carell is in this, and a couple other people that I really like and are good actors. And I've, heard some buzz about it that, some people are saying it might get Oscar nominations. I guess I'll go see this since I couldn't see the other movie. So I walk into the theater knowing nothing about this story and not even knowing that, again, it was going to have this Olympic storyline. So Foxcatcher is the story of John DuPont, of the famous and wealthy DuPont family, who, again, this is a bit of a spoiler alert, but at the same time, it's a true story. A lot of people know about this, but he got really obsessed with U.S. wrestling and wanting to be the sponsor for U.S. wrestling and seeing himself as a coach. And there were definitely some mental health things going on with him. And again, I don't want to do too many spoilers, but there's a lot of very strange things happening in this movie, and it ends up culminating in the murder of an Olympic wrestler who is training there at the facility he builds. So yeah, it's one of those movies where you watch it and you're kind of like, no, this can't be true. No, this can't be true. And while there are things that they do change about the true life story, the craziest things in the movie are all true. So if you're a Steve Carell fan, he is amazing in this movie because he's nothing like a lot of the characters that he became famous for. He's not anything like Michael Scott off of The Office. He is honestly pretty terrifying in this movie, and he is just so amazing in it. But it's also got Mark Ruffalo in it, who a lot of people might know as Bruce Banner from a lot of the Marvel movies. Channing Tatum is in it. And Channing Tatum, I'm not a huge fan of him, but he is amazing in this movie as Mark Schultz. So he and Mark Ruffalo are brothers in this movie, and they both work together amazing in it. And then the movie was directed by Bennett Miller, who, if you like movies about sports, he directed one of my favorite movies about sports, which is Moneyball. So it's this wonderful kind of blending together of, if you love the Olympics, you love true stories, and you also love true crime, it all combines together in this one movie. So definitely recommend watching it. It is a darker themed movie, obviously, so not necessarily one you're gonna want to watch every other week, but it's definitely worth adding to the list if you've never gone and seen it. So yeah, that's Foxcatcher for you.
Yeah, I'm assuming Carell is in a serious role in this one, and I feel like it always throws me off a little bit to see him being more serious, knowing what I know about that story.
Yeah, it is definitely not a comedy. It is a dark drama with murder and lots of creepiness happening in it. And that's why I say, like, Steve Carell's so amazing in it. And he got an Oscar nomination for the movie because not only is his performance so good, but it's so different than what we've seen him do in a lot of the kind of goofball comedies he's sometimes known for. Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely go check that out. And again, just in case, we're going to continue this dark theme here. And so, Sarah, we're going to kick it back over to your list and tell everyone a little bit about Munich.
Yeah, so let me be upfront that it has been, well, I hate doing math, and I know it's been over a decade since I've watched it. So take what I say with a grain of salt, admittedly. But that being said, high school, Sarah went to Blockbuster and found like a $5 movie deal on a used DVD of Munich. And that is how I discovered this movie. So yeah, Blockbuster, we've all been there buying the used DVDs. And so I thought as a high school kid, oh, this is something to do with the Olympics. How exciting. I'm going to buy it.
Oh my gosh.
So you can imagine my shock. And, you know, Jonathan, I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, that yes, it ties in the Olympics. But it's not centered around necessarily one Olympic athlete. It's more about the pursuit of the Israeli team not the Israeli team as in the Olympic athletes, but the Israeli government trying to go after the folks that killed the Israeli athletes in the 1972 Munich massacre. So it's definitely more of the aftermath of what happened. And you know, the reason that this is on my list is because even though I said a lot of blockbuster movies I've not seen, this is one that, because of the notoriety, I am grateful, because what happened is that from watching this alone as a teenager, which that was a little scary, but watching it, I ended up going on a deep dive into the massacre of the Israeli athletes. And so I learned a lot about what happened at those Olympic Games due to the movie. And so I think, and it is a good movie. It's a good movie. It's very intense, lots of action, if that's your kind of thing. I do think it is important to be like, it's not like you're going to see everything from point A to point Z or whatever about like the Israeli athletes coming and all that stuff. But yeah, I think it's an important film in the sense that it probably got a lot of people to learn and research, like myself, about the athletes that were murdered. And so I think from that standpoint, it's on my list. It's not one that I want to sit and watch over and over again. I like happy movies. I'm going to talk about a happy movie here in a few minutes that I think might make you roll your eyes, and I don't care. But it's on my list because of its historical significance.
Yeah. I mean, I remember seeing Munich in theaters when it came out. I was in college at the time. It was, I believe 2005 when it came out. I thought it was one of the best movies that came out that year. It's directed by Steven Spielberg. I think it got a bunch of Oscar nominations. I don't know that it won anything, but still, it was a great movie. And as I've mentioned to you before, it does end up on a lot of lists of Olympic movies to watch, but I personally don't consider it an Olympic movie. That's just, that's just my 2 cents. But at the same time, everything that happens in it does happen because of the kidnapping and massacre of the Israeli athletes that happened at the 72 games. So I go back and forth sometimes on whether it should be counted, but it is a great film in its own right. Just, yes, like you said, very heavy, very dark, very bloody and brutal, because it's literally just about a group of Israeli assassins being sent out to hunt down the people involved in the massacre. We can finally move it into a little bit more positive space. So the next movie I have on my list is Rising Phoenix. So Rising Phoenix, if you have Netflix, you can find it on there because they produced it or whatever. So it's available there. It is a documentary, and it focuses on a handful of Paralympic athletes and tells their stories. And then it also explains more about the history of the Paralympics and how the movement actually began. So some of the Paralympic athletes that are featured in it include Jean-Baptiste Alais. It's also got Tatiana McFadden in it, who I believe was also an executive producer on it. There's a couple parts where we hear from Andrew Parsons, of course, who's the president of the IPC. It's got Ellie Cole in it, who's a para swimmer. I'm trying to remember who else has. Oh, Matt Stutzman is in it for para archery. His story is just so amazing, and he's fun to watch. He's fun to just hear talk about his life. So yeah, it's got a lot of really great Paralympic athletes just sharing their stories, and then again that kind of mixed in with the background of the Paralympic movement, where it started, how it became a thing, how it started to run parallel to the Olympics, and then really the struggle for visibility. Yeah, it's one of those movies that I tell people that they really need to watch it. And I don't see how anyone could watch that movie and then not become a huge fan of the Paralympics and want to watch the Paralympics when they're on. Once you hear some of these stories and understand why the movement is so important. And that at the end of the day, it's not just about, and Sarah, I know you and I have talked about this before, off mic, but the Paralympics, a lot of times they get kind of summarized and boiled down to just being, oh, it's so inspirational watching people with disabilities play sports. No, it's sports that are just designed in a different way to meet, for the people who have different needs, but they are elite athletes in their own right. And so
right.
I think this movie does such a good job of explaining that and showing that. And I hope everyone listening to this episode, if you haven't seen it, I don't care. You can stop listening to the episode and just go watch it. You should.
Does that mean
that's why it's on?
Does that mean I should go watch it right now because I'm the slacker that still hasn't seen it, even though it's been on my watch list? So,
yeah, honestly,
Shame.
Just get up from the mic right now, go watch it. We can always record later on. I'll just splice it together, right?
Shame. I know. Shame.
Yeah, no, you've got it. You've got to watch this.
When it came out, I remember seeing Tatiana post about it and being really excited.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it came out, I very much was in the newborn phase with my kid, and so yeah, there's a lot of movies that just kind of got mentally put on my list that I need to go back and watch now that, I'm sleeping again.
Yeah.
You know that life.
Well, and honestly, I think that's part of why I do. Well, and I think that's part of why I never saw Unbroken. So we were still just dealing with all of that stuff of becoming parents that year. And then that movie came out and it was like, I didn't go see movies in 2014. Yeah. So I'm sure that's why I never saw it. But yeah, no, you definitely need to watch this one. And again, I think it's, for anyone who likes this podcast, it's so good because it goes through that history while also sharing these athlete stories. But anyway, I could rant about it for much longer, but we probably need to go ahead and move on to the next one on our list here. So kicking it back over to you, Sarah, for a movie that I am surprised I myself have not watched this one. It's been on my list for a long time and I've just never gotten around to it. But Prefontaine.
Yeah, so good old Steve Prefontaine is a legend in the track and field community. He was a runner that saw a lot of success, and this is one movie that's been made about him. I know that there's another one. The title is escaping me right now, but I know it was produced by Tom Cruise. But the movie that we're talking about, Prefontaine, it stars Jared Leto, who I know is really popular. I know a lot of people like him. Again, this is where I'm like, oh yeah, he's that famous actor guy.
But a lot of people know him as a musician.
That's true. It's true. So, no, I do have a lot of friends that have spent tons of money to go see him in concert. So I should say this famous entertainer,
right?
Famous entertainer. But the movie came out in 1997. So I feel like when I saw it, I just happened to see it on TV several years ago. I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but he was a very successful collegiate runner. He went to the 1972 Munich Games. It seemed like he may pull out a medal at those games. And he was young. I think he was 19, 20 at those Olympics, and ended up being passed in the final lap. I think less than half a lap to go, and ends up coming in fourth place. And so, heartbreak, but also he was a very talented athlete, had a bright future ahead of him. But unfortunately, he came home, fell in some hard times after his collegiate career. He actually became an activist because of the amateur rules at the time. He basically couldn't be a professional runner in the way that people are now. So he became an activist in the United States to get athletes better funding so that they could better compete against other international athletes, which I think is just such an interesting part of his story. And unfortunately, he had an untimely death in a car accident after drinking, which all kinds of frustrating there. It's just so sad. It's so tragic that is what happened. So I guess I am giving away a bunch of spoilers, but so I don't know. You can edit some of it out. But...
It's not something. Look, if someone pulls him up on Wikipedia, they're gonna know that in 5 seconds anyway. Yeah, so you're good.
And honestly, if I'm gonna watch a movie like this about someone that I'm not familiar with, I want to know that that's happening. Like if I suspect that there's tragedy in a movie, I look it up ahead of time so that I'm prepared for it. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just preparing my friends out there. But his legacy is that rules were changed for athletes. The amateur, I did write this down, the Amateur Sports Act of 1978 gave athletes more control over their sports governance, and that contributed to better financial situations for a lot of athletes. And so there was that part of his legacy. And then, of course, just being an amazing runner. He had a huge following as a college guy. People would yell pre whenever he ran. And now every year there is the Prefontaine Classic, which is a huge track meet that, I mean, chances are if you like sports, you've seen it on your TV. And so his legacy lives on. So yeah, it's definitely a story with lots of joy and excitement and appreciation for what he brought to the sport of running, but also one that ends in tragedy. So I guess we're back to being sad.
Yeah, I know. And yes, by the way, the other movie about Steve Prefontaine is called Without Limits. It came out the very following year, 1998.
Yes.
Yes, and it had Billy Crudup in the role of Steve Prefontaine. But I've not seen either of those movies, and it's really strange for two movies about the same person to come out in back-to-back years. It's a very unusual situation. And of course, the two movies get compared to each other a lot, but I've not watched either, and that's a little shocking because I know the legacy of Prefontaine as a long distance runner myself. I mean, we used to talk about when I ran cross country in high school. That was, he was someone we would talk about, and yet I never sat down and watched either movie about his life. So I don't know whether, one is more accurate than the other. I'd love to hear from other people what their hot take is on that. Which one should I start with, people? Should I start with Without Limits or should I start with Prefontaine? I'm open-minded here. So
that's a good question.
But we are back to being sad. All right, so we're going to kick it back over to my list. And so the next one that I have on my list is actually another documentary about Paralympians. I didn't really plan it out that way. It was just kind of how I ended up putting it on the list. But Murder Ball, which is a documentary about wheelchair rugby. So this movie, I'm trying to remember, I didn't get to see it in theaters, but I remember my older brother recommended it to me. He had seen it somewhere, and I remember he called me up and he said, "You have to watch this movie." And I said, okay. And I went, and as you mentioned Blockbuster earlier, I went and rented it because that was something we used to do back in the day, and watched it and absolutely fell in love with it as a movie, fell in love with wheelchair rugby, and it just really helped open my eyes more at that point of my life to what the Paralympics were. Even though I knew about the Paralympics before watching Murder Ball, I had no idea the breadth of sports that were in the Paralympics. I knew nothing about wheelchair rugby until watching it. So one of the people who shows up a lot in the movie is Mark Zupan, who was on the gold medal winning team for the 2004 Athens Paralympics. And if you watched the Paralympics this past year in Tokyo, he was one of the commentators on it. So he is prominently featured in the movie. I believe it got an Oscar nomination for Best Documentary. I don't think it actually won, but it's a fantastic documentary and just good movie overall. But Sarah, I can't remember. Have you seen this one?
I have not, and it's also one that I'm ashamed to say I haven't seen because I love wheelchair rugby.
All right. Well, here's the good thing about this episode is it's giving each one of us a list of things we need to go watch that we should have seen and haven't. So yeah. But yeah, Murder Balls, again, another one of those that I think it's a must see for any fan of the games, because it really is just good storytelling. And yeah, if you don't already love the Paralympics, then I think it's a good one to introduce to people so that they can understand just the nature of the sport and just how tough these guys are when they're out there playing. But yeah, so that's Murder Ball. And then, yes, going to kick it back over to you, Sarah, for the one that's going to make me roll my eyes. So I'm going to try my best not to.
Yeah. I'm just...
The Simone Biles story.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I have no shame whatsoever. And I just want you to know, I just pulled this up on the IMDb, and you can judge me all you want, but this is an award-winning film. It received it received a Leo award, a Reframe award that I don't know what that is, but it received 2 Image awards from the NAACP. So I think that is worth noting. But okay, Simone Biles' Courage to Soar. The reason that I put this on here is not so much because it's one of the best films ever made, but because it's Simone Biles. And I am unashamedly a huge Simone fan. And I mean, she's a great athlete. We know that. She's arguably the greatest of all time in women's gymnastics. Pretty easy to get behind that. Mm-hmm. But the movie, I thought, did a great job showing her journey of her childhood and being in foster care and the challenges that she went through. I appreciate that it didn't hide away from that, but I also thought that it, and this is one that I saw, I guess, when it probably first came out, which would be 2018, 2019. But I feel like it was one that did it very, very well, to where I think that kids that maybe had been in situations similar to her could have watched it and felt, okay, I'm not alone, and that I can still do like amazing things. And whether that amazing thing is simply doing well on a test at school or going all the way to the Olympics, I thought that it was great in terms of that. And if you're not familiar with Simone's story, get familiar with her story. Again, her athletic achievements, and especially after the 2020 games in Tokyo, people have made her, whether she wanted to be or not, she's become kind of an advocate for mental health. And so we all see that. But her story that began years and years ago, I think, is just really unique. And I appreciated the way that they told her story in the movie. And then also, a lot of gymnastics movies are really, really cheesy. I think it's okay to say that because, and especially with you having a son who does gymnastics, to where if you watch any gymnastics, when you see it in a movie and you're like, oh, they're saying this is an Olympic level routine and it's like a round off flip flop. Okay, sure. But I thought some of the gymnastics in the movie was actually not bad. So, I thought it was it's a feel good movie, despite the hardships that she overcame and how they show that. I feel like overall it's a feel good movie. And it's Simone freaking Biles. I don't care how cheesy it is. I would watch a cartoon that's based on her because she's incredible. So judge me all you want for my Lifetime movie. I don't care.
Yeah. Well, here's it. I mean, we love Simone Biles in our house. Absolutely. And I do love her story. I'm just not going to watch the Lifetime movie about it. You know what? I would watch the cartoon about it because they could probably get the cartoon character to do exactly what she does in real life. So it'd be more, accurate. Because they can engineer all of that in the computer, right?
Valid point.
But yeah, we love Simone Biles. yeah, her story is definitely important in, our family, simply because we do have a boy who loves gymnastics, and, our oldest son, he is adopted. And so having people like Simone Biles, who's adopted, to point to, and Yul Moldauer to point to, he sees himself in those people. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again because I believe it, but, that type of representation matters as well for little boys and little girls to be able to see themselves in these athletes. So we love her as well. I'm just, this isn't one I'm going to be adding to my list. Sorry.
Fine.
Okay. So I think that rounds out your list of movies that were different when I compared our two lists. I've got one more on mine that was different than yours, and we're going to return to the topic of Munich with it. And this one's another documentary, but One Day in September. This is probably my favorite documentary film that has ever been made or that I've seen. It is very difficult to watch, and it covers the 1972 games. It specifically covers the kidnapping and the massacre of the Israeli athletes and coaches who were taken by the extremist group Black September. So that's, part of where the name comes from. The Olympics were held in the month of September in 1972. The extremist group called themselves Black September. And if you don't know this story, definitely go watch the movie. It's a very thorough investigation of what happened. And it explains a lot of the things that if you only know the surface story, you might not understand how these things happen. So it does a great job of explaining the background, explaining why security was so lax at these games, explaining, what the motivation was even for the extremists, for why they targeted the Israeli athletes. And it's just really sad and heartbreaking. And there's definitely parts of it that are very difficult to watch because they do show pictures of after the murder. And so, it's definitely one of those things where I know we already gave like a parental warning, but it's definitely one of those movies, since it is a documentary, that, big trigger warning ahead of it. If you sit down to watch it, you need to know that those things are going to come up in the movie, and you can have a very real visceral reaction, which, I mean, we should be horrified by what happened to those athletes, but it's a powerful movie. It did win an Oscar for Best Documentary Film the year that came out, 1999, I believe. But yeah, definitely a powerful film to go watch. Let's go ahead and talk about the 6 movies that we had in common on our list, which the first one of those, again, we'll get into a little bit more of a positive space here. And I think most of our listeners will probably have seen this movie because it's pretty big. A lot of people know this in the Olympic community, but the Disney movie Miracle, about the U.S. hockey team, Miracle on Ice.
So good.
Very, very famous story. Yeah, I mean, anyone who follows hockey, even if they aren't Olympic fans. I mean, I have, friends who aren't into the Olympics, but they like more traditional sports like football, basketball, hockey, and everyone knows the story and how big of a deal it was. Of course, Herb Brooks, the coach of the team, of the Olympic team, is played by Kurt Russell in the movie. It came out in 2004. It's one of those movies that sometimes, this is going to sound bad, sometimes I turn it on for background noise when I'm working on projects because I don't necessarily have to pay attention to it, but it's just a good, uplifting, positive movie. It's just something good to have playing in the background sometimes when I have projects that I need to work on.
Yeah. Well, I will say this is one that I spend a lot of time in the kitchen baking, and this is one that I too have had on in the background as a feel-good movie because I don't know if it's still on Netflix, but it was on Netflix for a long time, so it was easy to just turn it on. But
Yeah, it's on Disney Plus now since it's a Disney movie.
Yeah.
So if you have Disney Plus, you can.
That's right.
Yeah, you can pull it up on there.
Yeah, I forget. We don't get Disney stuff really as much as we used to. But, well, I mean, now that we have Disney Plus. But anyway. Yeah, I forget that that's a thing. Yeah, it's a great historical moment in history. And I love the locker room speech. I think everybody does if you have any kind of soul. But yeah, great moments are born from great opportunity. Herb Brooks, that's enough said. I remember my family went and saw it in the theaters. And it was cool because Salt Lake 2002, I was still pretty young at the time. And I think I'd heard of the Miracle on Ice, but I didn't really know about it until watching the 2002 opening ceremony with my parents and Mike Irizoni and the rest of the Miracle team. They came to light the cauldron. It was a real cauldron, by the way, at the 2002 Olympics. And so it was cool that just a short time later, we got this really great movie. So I remember making that connection and knowing that it was a big deal. I'm also going to slightly detour and say the Do You Believe in Miracles? I think it's amazing that in 2018, we also got Do You Believe in Miracles when the guys won the gold for Team USA in curling. So I'm always going to bring it back to curling. But I say that to say that everything to do with this movie and this team, I feel like we still see little glimpses of how significant that victory was, not just over Russia, but getting the gold medal because, you know, Russia was not the gold medal game.
Yeah. The Soviet Union.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Let's correct
Soviet
that.
Union.
Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So mixture of countries, not just Russia. So
but that whole moment, their run to gold, that we still see little moments trickling down into our culture even now. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's just a classic sports movie in general, but it's, you know, definitely one that, you know, again, I think most people who love the Olympics have probably already seen it, but if you haven't, you know, again, if you have Disney Plus, you can find it on there really easily. So the next one that we have on our list, I actually just watched this movie pretty recently. I think it was really only about 6 months ago I watched it, but the movie Race, which of course tells the story of Jesse Owens and his journey to the 1936 Berlin Games. So here we are talking about Berlin once again, seems to come up a lot. And the reason I only recently watched it, I remember when it came out, and I kind of judged it without watching it. And I think part of that was because it came out around the same time as the movie about Jackie Robinson, and I was really disappointed by that movie. So I think when this one came out, I was like, oh no, they're going to butcher Jesse Owens' story. And so I just chose not to go see it. But then about 6 months ago when I was sick one day, I decided to watch it, and I actually really enjoyed it. But yeah, Sarah, I mean, what do you like about this movie?
So I feel like growing up, we learned a lot about Jesse Owens during Black History Month. As an Olympic fan, I probably knew a little bit more than the normal person or at least the normal person in my context situation, because I knew, you know, I knew about the medals that he won. I knew about the German athlete helping him figure out how to do the long jump correctly. All of these little things. At the same time, I feel like this movie introduced me to so much more of his story that I had no idea about. And I remember, once again, clearly movies just make me go do a bunch of research, because I remember reading a lot of quotes from him. After watching this movie, my husband and I went to see it in the theater. And I feel like something that I remember really taking away from this, and make sure that I'm not confused since you've seen it a lot more recently than I have. But when he gets home, he doesn't get like kind of snubbed at the White House Am I remembering this correctly in the movie that they depict this?
Yeah, the White House invited, some of the Olympic
Mm-hmm.
athletes to come meet the president, and notably, Jesse was not included in that,
Right.
despite his, incredible achievement. I mean, it had been, I think decades since someone had won 4 gold medals in track and field
Mm-hmm.
at the Olympic Games. So yeah, I mean, that was, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's racism. It's wrong.
Right.
It's, it's an important part of the story. It's an important thing to remember. But yeah, they do touch on it a little bit in the movie, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
I remember
But
it being like very, very quick and at the end. And so naturally that made me read
mhm,
a lot about how that really unfolded in real life and that Jesse spoke about that and how he did all these great things for his country and wasn't even welcomed at the White House. And so it's not a surprise knowing
yeah,
what you know about our history here, but yeah, just like little
right.
things like that that I just didn't know, and even about him running at Ohio State, that was new information to me. So I think it was a
hmm
great movie. I haven't
Yeah.
I don't know if are there even other movies about Jesse Owens out there? I don't know if there are. Again, I'm probably the worst person to ask when it comes to movies.
I don't know.
So I thought it was great.
Yeah, there's not any others that I know unless there's a documentary out there somewhere. But yeah, one thing that stood out to me about that movie that I didn't know about his story, because like you, I went and did the research and was like, wait, is this actually true? Was really the struggle that a lot of Black athletes had of, why should we go represent the
Mm-hmm.
United States over in Germany? And that, there were Black athletes who chose, not to participate. And there was a lot of pressure on Jesse Owens himself of, making this stand by not going to the games. But he ultimately decided he made a bigger statement by going to the games.
Right.
Right. And again, it's what was the right answer for him wasn't necessarily the right answer for someone else. It has to be about personal choice. And he made his choice to go to Berlin and do his thing and run because he loved it, and represent a country that didn't always love him,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. So that was an interesting part of the movie that I didn't realize that was happening behind the scenes in the Black community. And so I thought they did a pretty good job in the movie of showing that and bringing that issue up in a way that didn't feel too heavy-handed, but was new information, I think, for a lot of us.
Yeah,
So,
and now that we're talking
um,
about it, I will also say that I remember them showing clips involving Avery Brundage. Brundage is his name.
oh yeah, he's a big
Yeah,
character in it.
with the
Hmm.
IOC, and that also was something that I researched. And if you know much about the Olympic movement at the time, Avery is not a great guy. Um, like I knew that without the
Yeah,
film, but seeing it played out in the film, I thought was really good because it was very enlightening. That spoiler alert, there's some shady stuff that goes down with the Olympic movement, which is really unfortunate. And um, not to send us too far
yeah.
down a rabbit trail, I actually almost there's a documentary that I believe you can watch on Peacock
Hmm.
called Olympic Pride, American Prejudice. I almost put that on my list, and it is about the other African American athletes that represented Team USA in Berlin, and it was really well done, I thought, and very
Mm,
informative. So I recommend that for more about the
yeah,
athletes that were not Jesse Owens.
right. Yeah, I've seen that flicker across my screen, but I have not watched it. But yeah, I was surprised by this movie because I guess I had low expectations of it.
So see, you should go watch the
But
Simone.
it surprised
Go
me, and
watch Simone Biles. You might be
I
surprised.
eh, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen with that one. But anyway. Oh, and also, if you need the motivation, the movie Race also has Jason Sudeikis in it, playing Larry Snyder, who was Jesse Owens's coach. So I guess that was his practice before he turned into Ted Lasso. So, but I like Jason Sudeikis, and so if you need another reason to watch this, he's in it too. So there's that. All right, moving along. So the next one is a movie that I think most people have seen. It was a hit movie when it came out. It's one that a lot of people return to. It's very quotable, but of course, Cool Runnings, the Disney movie about the first Jamaican bobsled team. And I'll start off our discussion of it admitting that while it is quote unquote based on a true story, very little of the real story of the Jamaican athletes is actually in the movie. Here are the parts that actually line up with what really happened. There was a Jamaican bobsled team. That's about as accurate as the movie is. The rest of it is pretty much completely made up. And regardless, it still makes my list because it's just a fun movie to watch about 4 athletes pursuing an Olympic dream. And yeah, I don't know. It's just a fun movie, even if they completely disregard the actual true story for the most part. But yeah, Sarah, when did you first see Cool Runnings? Because this was one that came out when I was a kid and was really big. How about you?
Yep, I remember seeing it as a kid, and I had an older brother that insisted on watching it a lot, from what I remember, because I feel like I saw it so many times. So yeah, because I just looked it up. It came out, I think, 1993. So that would make me 4 years old.
Yeah.
So I don't remember too much about watching it at that age, but just growing up watching it, it was the classic. I think we probably had it on VHS. Feel the rhythm, feel the rhyme. I mean, if you watch bobsled and don't think that in your head, then have you even seen the movie? Probably not. Or this is the reason that, like, when you're a kid in the bathtub, you start acting like it's a bobsled because that's what they do in the movie. So it's great. Yeah. Lots of laughter, some little moments at the end that might make you a little sad, but it's all about overcoming and, like you said, living out the dream.
Right. Yeah. No, it's just a fun movie, and I sat down pretty recently and introduced Kai to it. So that's my older son. I don't usually say his name, but there it is. So I introduced him to it pretty recently, and I told him I was doing it kind of to prep him for the Winter Olympic Games. I was like, buddy, you need to watch this movie because it's gonna open your eyes to a whole new world of sports that you haven't really watched yet. It's gonna open you up to sliding sports, which are just some of my favorite to watch. So he enjoyed it, and we had a good time having a little father-son movie night together watching Cool Runnings. So once again, if you have Disney Plus, you can pull it up on there if you need a little nostalgia. The next one that we both shared on our list, it's going to take it a little bit darker again. Definitely, like, pretty much the clear opposite of Cool Runnings, which is I, Tonya. I'm not even sure where to start with this movie.
I'm over here just laughing, just thinking about how ridiculous this movie is.
Yeah. This was one that I didn't get to go see in theaters, but pretty much as soon it was available streaming, I watched it. And I love the style of this movie. I think it tells her story so creatively. If you haven't seen it, it's told like a mockumentary. And so what's great about it is it shows these different perspectives, because there's a lot of people who are involved in this scandal who they have very different accounts of what actually happened. And I think the movie does a really good job of showing all those different versions of it, and then kind of letting you as the viewer decide what you want to believe. And it, even though it's a true story, it kind of treats it a little bit like a dark comedy. And that sounds a little bit disrespectful, I guess, and sounds like it shouldn't work, but somehow it does. I mean, it's not a movie for everybody, but I really, really like this movie a lot. So,
yeah. I watched this a few times. Like, I saw it when it first came out. A group of girls from the church I go to were like, "Hey, Sarah, we're going to have ladies' night. You want to go see Tonya?" And I was like, "Yeah, you got to really convince me to go watch a movie about an Olympian." So
yeah, perfect church movie to go watch.
I don't know if they realized what they were doing. I think they just thought, "Oh, this looks like a chick flick."
Oh my gosh.
I know. If they're listening, shout out to all of y'all, because I remember afterwards they were like, "Is this real?" So yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, so as someone who doesn't know a lot of actors, actresses, like you said, Mark Ruffalo earlier, and I was like, "Oh yeah, he was in 13 Going on 30. Can't tell you much about anything else he's been in."
Oh
but but what makes this situation unique is that I love Allison Janney, and if I see Allison Janney in anything, like, I'll watch it. I will watch any TV show. I love The West Wing. I love the TV series Mom. I thought she was amazing in I, Tonya, playing Tanya's mom.
Yeah.
Some of the criticism that came out.
She's amazing. Yeah. She won an Oscar for it.
And rightfully so.
Yeah.
I remember there were a lot of things with this that I researched, and I was like, "Is this for real?" And the people that were involved in this are truly a group of characters that, I mean, they are interesting people. Some of the criticism that came out after this was saying that, like, "Oh, it makes Tonya look too innocent, blah, blah, blah." But honestly, I thought the way that everything would be like, so Margot Robbie playing Tonya, everything that happened in the movie, she would say, "Well, it wasn't my fault. Well, this wasn't my fault." And so for me, I thought the movie kind of told a story that she could never accept responsibility for things that maybe could have been her fault. And so I don't think it, like, painted her as being this perfect, innocent person, but I do think it helps tell the story that she had a rough go of it, and the odds were against her to fit into the figure skating world, no matter what. And that is real, no matter how you slice it. So, but it is a ridiculous film. One thing that I gotta say, I'm going to do a little humble brag. I found myself in New York City in the spring, I think, after this movie came out. And if there's anything to do with sports and Olympics, wherever I am, I'm going to find it. So the Dancing with the Stars cast for when they did athletes was being revealed. So I snatched a ticket to Good Morning America, and I got to, like, be in the room with Tonya Harding when it was announced that she was going to be on Dancing with the Stars. So I have pictures of her when that was happening. So I don't know, maybe I'll post that on our social media. But I remember she kind of got not as well received at that moment as other athletes did. So but anyway, I we'll cover her at some point, I'm sure. But the film itself, incredible.
Yeah. You know, here's one thing I really like about the movie is, and I've said this before on the podcast, but we have to remember that human beings are really complex creatures, and none of us are perfect. And you know, as someone who spent, you know, a lot of years working with young people going through trauma, that part of the movie definitely resonated with me. Like, her actions and her way of thinking made sense to me, because I was like, oh, she's really not that different than a lot of the kids that I used to work with. And so I think, you know, so I know some people don't like the movie for that reason, because they want to think of Tonya Harding as a villain, and they only want to focus on the negative, and they don't want to consider maybe some things that were happening in the background, and some things, as you said, that were stacked against her.
Right.
So, but, you know, we need to look at the whole person is the thing. You know, we have to take the good with the bad for all of us. But yeah, great movie, incredible cast. It also has Sebastian Stan in it, who a lot of people will know as Bucky from the Marvel movies, and Allison Janney, who we already talked about. Margot Robbie got an Oscar nomination for it. She's amazing in it. It also has Paul Walter Hauser, who stars in Richard Jewell. So he's got, I guess, a little bit of, Olympism running through his resume with the parts that he takes. I really like him. He's a great actor. So that's I, Tonya. If you haven't checked it out, go watch it. I will just say, another trigger warning for it, because there are scenes in it that deal with domestic violence. So if that's something in your background, you need to be aware of that going into the movie, that there are going to be some things come up that may be hard to watch and could be triggering.
Yeah.
So there is that little warning for you. All right. Next on the list, and this is our second to last on the list that we both shared, but the documentary film Icarus that came out just a few years ago and also won an Oscar for Best Documentary Film. But Sarah, explain Icarus to people, because it can be a little bit of a difficult movie to describe without giving away too much.
Yeah, so it's been a while since I've seen it, but so correct me if I'm wrong whenever I explain this. But long story short, it's about the Russian doping scandal. What I think is particularly interesting is that the documentary starts off one way and then becomes something completely different. And it basically tells the world how Putin has been involved in this. It becomes very clear to anyone that sees this, with plenty of evidence, mind you, with the people that are involved, that that this is a state-sponsored ordeal.
Yeah, it was one. So this was a movie where I knew what I was getting myself into with it. I knew what it was going to be about, and it still surprised me, which is a good thing when I know what a movie is going to be about, and it still finds ways to open my eyes and shock me. And you're right. One of the things I love about this movie is it so artfully starts out one way and then takes you on a crazy journey. Just suddenly turns on a dime. So yeah, like I said, don't want to give away too much because it's a really interesting journey. And again, it's a documentary, so it's really wild just seeing some of the things play out that the documentarian wasn't planning on.
Yes.
Because he had one idea for a movie and ended up making a different one. And so Brian Fogel, who is the filmmaker behind it and is kind of the central figure in it, he does an amazing job of weaving the story together. It is a Netflix film, so you can go find it on there if you haven't had a chance to watch it. And then last but not least, we are going to end with, a movie that I think most people, when they think of Olympics and movies, you can't ignure this one.
Cue the music.
But the movie Chariots of Fire. We can't afford the music. So yeah, that's not going to happen. But it did win an Oscar for its music because it's that good.
I was just going to say, if you haven't seen the movie, you know the music. You probably don't know that you know the music, but you know the music.
Yes, you absolutely know it. And that's kind of unfortunate, is the music is so good in it that it's been spoofed a lot of times. It was just kind of one of those things that the culture latched onto and, turned into a joke. But when watched in the context of the movie, it's fantastic. And this will come as no surprise to anyone, but this is my all-time favorite movie. And it has been for a long time. I first watched Chariots of Fire when I was in 8th grade. It immediately became my favorite movie, and it has stayed that way since then. I don't see that changing. It is it's the story of the 1924 Olympic Games, centering specifically on two members of the British team, but Scotsman Eric Liddell, who has a really interesting story in his own right. And then Harold Abrams, a Jewish British runner who, the movie's about their rivalry to some degree, and kind of how, even though they, trained separately and they didn't really know each other outside of the running world, how in a lot of ways they were pushing each other to be better, and how they had very different goals in what they were trying to accomplish by going to the Olympics. And yet both of their goals are admirable in their own ways. But it's just a fantastic movie. It was an underdog at the Oscars that year, and it won Best Picture against a movie that everyone else was expecting to win. So in true Olympic fashion, we love an underdog story. But yeah, again, I could talk about it all day. But Sarah, what do you like about Chariots of Fire?
Oh gosh, well, the story, I love the story, which, I mean, you've already hinted to a little bit. And yeah, on a side note, someone, if you're listening to this, shout out to Meredith. Someone recently sent my son a children's book about Eric Liddell, and these athletes had very unique stories in their own rights. And it's cool that their stories meet at the 1924 Olympics, or that they really unfold, that's kind of like that's where we're going in the story. And I feel like the 1924 Olympics, right. We don't have a lot of movies about that. Not that we have a lot of movies about all the Olympics, but especially in that era, it seems like there's so many stories from 1936 that get told. So I love that these stories got told in Chariots of Fire. It's a classic, not much to say about it other than everyone should watch it. I grew up watching it, me with my family. I have friends that don't even like the Olympics, but they love this movie. Yeah. And again, cue the music. Like people know the music. Yeah. If you don't know the music, you love it. Yeah. Everybody loves music. Like, it's stuck in my head right now in case that's not obvious.
Yeah. If you've ever gone running on a beach, you've pretended you're in this movie, whether you realized it or not. So it's got that famous opening and closing sequence of the running on the beach. So, but yeah, again, I could devote a whole episode just to talking about the movie. We won't do that to our listeners, but that's where we're ending. So those are our favorite games movies, and hopefully there will be more to come. After all, Boys in the Boat is being made into a movie. So excited! So I'm looking forward to that. I just read that book pretty recently and loved it. So yeah. And, who knows, maybe one of these days, the movie that I wrote about the Olympics will actually get made. I don't know. It's not looking super promising, but it was fun to work on. I'll put it that way. Or, hey, maybe the script that I wrote about Declan Farmer, maybe that'll be the one that gets through. So we'll see. But I'm a little bit biased about that.
If we left something off the list that you love, let us know. And remember, go easy on me. I don't claim to be a film buff. We'd love to know your favorites too, or if there's something we need to see that we haven't, which I'm sure there's a lot for me. And if you enjoyed this episode, take a minute this week to tell a games-loving or history-loving friend about the show.
And you can join us next time for our discussion on the 1904 Olympic Games in St. Louis, Missouri. It is a doozy, and not exactly America's proudest moment. But until then, ought to see you later. The Games Odyssey podcast is a production of Wardrobe Media, LLC. This episode was written, hosted, produced, and edited by Jonathan Jordan and co-hosted by Sarah Patton. Show notes, including research sources and transcripts, can be found on our website, gamesodyssey.com. Olympic is a trademark of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, USOPC. Any use of Olympic in the Games Odyssey podcast is strictly for informational, commentary, and educational purposes. The Games Odyssey podcast is not an official podcast of the USOPC and is not sponsored, endorsed, or officially affiliated with the USOPC or the International Olympic Committee or International Paralympic Committee. The content of Games Odyssey podcast does not reflect the opinions, standards, views, or policies of the USOPC, and the USOPC in no way warrants that content featured in the Games Odyssey podcast is accurate.